name is Malcolm Graham, Chairman of the City of Charlotte Jobs and Economic Development Committee, and I'm calling the committee to order. Today we have a pretty full agenda of 3 items: housing, job summit planning, arts and culture, and international business strategy. Before we get started, I'd like to take the opportunity to, for the council members and committee members to introduce themselves, and then we'll also introduce the staff in the room, and then we'll get right into the agenda. Again, my name is Malcolm Graham, representing District 2, and I serve as chairman of the city's Economic Development Committee.
Ed Trace, committee member.
Dimple Ashmira, committee member.
Braxton Winston, serving at large and as mayor pro tem.
And we'll start at the back of the room, and we'll introduce everyone on the back wall, and then we'll introduce the staff at the table joining us.
Julia Martin, City Manager's Office. Alexis Gordon, Economic Development.
Todd DeLong, Economic Development.
Holly Eskridge, Economic Development. Anna London, Charlotte Works.
Jake House, Smart Starter, Mecklenburg County.
Mike Blackwelder, Smart Starter, Mecklenburg County.
Kristen Belkey, General Services.
Lauren Livingston, Communications.
Tracy Dodson, City Manager's Office.
Christina Thigpen, Economic Development.
Priya Sirkar, Arts and Culture Officer in the City Manager's Office.
Thanks, everyone, for attending. As I said earlier, we have 3 agenda items, starting with housing and job summit planning. We've allotted 30 minutes for this topic. Our staff resources are from the city manager, Tracy Dodson. So, Tracy, I will turn it over to you to introduce this topic and get us started.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham. If we could pull up the very short couple of slides that we have. Some of you that have already had committee meetings today, this will look familiar to you. But back on October 10th, the mayor referred the Housing and Job Summit to all of the 4 city council committees for discussion later tonight. And really the question is as we work towards addressing the community's needs for more housing and job options for all Charlotteans, what strategies in the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan should we explore? If we can go to the next slide. And so specific to this committee is, what are the recommendations around these topics or issues that you would like to see covered as we contemplate the upcoming summit? And then what are the suggestions or recommendations that you'd like for us for this committee to take forward into tonight? If we go to the next slide. Here, just to remind everybody, the 10 goals from the comprehensive plan. And if we can go to the next slide, we took the liberty of starting to pull out of those recommendations some of the topics that we thought were potential relevance, just to give you something to guide to as you think through this. Some of this will hits on initiatives that we currently have, such as a Hire Charlotte or corridors of opportunity, and then some is just how it grows into like tools for protecting residents in high vulnerability to displacement, or resources and programs to support residents facing severe housing instability or seeking transition from homelessness. So again, just something to get the conversation started as you think about this and to guide the discussion. So with that, I will turn it back over unless there's any questions. Do you have anything to add? No, thanks.
Thank you for that introduction and the potential relevance to housing and job summit outline. I will open the floor for questions, comments after I make some opening statements. I'm extremely excited about the Housing and Job Summit as we prepare for it. Obviously, jobs, from my perspective, is so important. Without a job, you can't get housing. Without a job, you can't get health care. Without a job, you can't send your kids to and get an affordable education. And so jobs is the platform for all that we do as relates to our community and our community stakeholders. Obviously, as we prepare for the summit, the job portion of it is extremely important. And we're talking about those frontline workers having the opportunity not only to have reasonable job opportunities, as in this morning, how do they get to those opportunities via transportation, public transportation, and more importantly, how can we use both of those to get adequate, safe, clean, and affordable housing? I think the outline that is illustrated here today is clearly broken down into 5 workable sections. And so I want to pause here and just kind of open it up to the committee members. We welcome the Mayor Pro Tem as well, who is joining us, to make sure that as we prepare for the summit that we put our best foot forward from this committee, because again, our lift for the summit is heavy, because we're expected to bring forward the baseline for the jobs and bring forth our community partners who will assist us in outlining what we've done, how that benefits the community, but more importantly, where do we go from here? What more can we do? And so let me just pause at this point. We welcome Councilmember Ashmere, who's with us virtually, as well as those council members in the room. And so let's see if we can spend maybe the next 20 minutes to ensure that we have a deliverable to the mayor as we prepare for this afternoon's council meeting and the job summit. Mr. Vice Chairman, floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. So we talked in transportation earlier in the committee about access to family-sustaining wage jobs, in the sense that we talked about the need to have transportation that provides more useful access from places where people live to where they work. I think the work on that is ongoing. We have Envision My Ride as a reform. I think the discussions we're having about transportation are definitely informed by the desire to achieve an outcome that does benefit people in terms of making it practical for them to get jobs and not have to spend 2 hours of their day. And Mr. Chair, I think you alluded to that earlier. So that is a part of our ongoing conversation. I don't know whether we've left anything out in the discussions that we've had. It's a big thing. I mean, we've got our TMN that we're working on. We're looking at overhauling the buses and changing the route structure of the buses so that, in effect, we have these little nodes where the buses can connect with rail and create a better network of connections through our public transportation. I would mention also protecting residents of high vulnerability to displacement. This is something that our NEST committee is working on. And so I think all of the council committees have been asked to consider this, but it's something that I think we probably need to hear some recommendations from that group that are spending a lot of time doing a deep dive on this subject. The issue here is that the way our UDO and 2040 plan were created was focused on promoting the creation of more housing as a way of bringing the cost of housing down. But the incidental effect of that is that as the market looks for places where there's an opportunity to create more housing, some of the inviting targets are what are currently lower income neighborhoods. And so we need to figure out how not to have, as an unintended consequence, the erosion of our existing affordable neighborhoods in the pursuit of the creation of more housing. I'm personally very interested in the work of Hire Charlotte, as I think Christina will confirm, and I'm glad that you're nodding and not shaking your head. I think that in particular apprenticeships where people can learn and study and get paid at the same time towards achieving some sort of trade credential that they can then use to create family-sustaining income. A trained trade professional, a tiler, or anybody like that, plumbers, can make $60,000, $80,000 a year. It's a very good income. One of our challenges there is that going to college has been perceived as a goal and as a sign of success, I think, in the minority community for some time. So persuading people that they can achieve more by going through training to work in a trade and offering them the opportunity to do that while earning income and attending classes. That, to me personally, based on having lived in Europe and witnessed the European apprenticeship models, seems like something that's very deserving of emphasis and investment on our part. And I think that's all the comments I have there. I do feel that we're doing a lot in these areas, so we need to ask ourselves whether we've coordinated our various efforts and initiatives in order to make the best possible use of our resources. But I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ed. Dimple, do you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you. At our governmental and intergovernmental committee meeting at noon, we discussed this item, and the committee had multiple recommendations on how we should address budget implications, right? Because at the end of the summit, we would like to see whether workforce development program or housing, all of that discussion and the next steps will have some sort of budget implications. So we need, as we tackle our next year's budget, let's weave that into our overall budget planning and budget workshops. One message that was very clear from the committee is the workforce development and ensuring that there is we are preparing not just for the jobs of today, but also for tomorrow. And so ensuring there is an intergovernmental collaboration here and inviting all the right partners to the table as we have this important discussion on housing and jobs, especially the county. Additional comments were around the recession. Multiple economies, there are reports out there that shows that a recession, we should experience some sort of recession within the next year. So how do we plan our housing and job strategy around that? And also, as we are looking at our property reassessment, that is also going to be in front of us next year, how do we ensure that we are taking care of our elderly residents? Many times we hear our elderly residents live on a fixed income. And as we go through this reassessment exercise, I'm quite concerned about many of these residents getting displaced with the higher property values. So all of that needs to be factored into as we make important decisions for next year's budget. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ajmer. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. If you've tuned into any of the early committee meetings, this first comment, you'll be familiar, and I think you guys are doing it really well, figuring out how to tie it to the deliverable, excuse me, the suggestions for how to make the goals in our comp plan deliverable. So I think you're starting in a good place. I really think we should hone in on the diverse and resilient economic opportunity section, and number 9 in particular, barriers to employment. And I would hope that we don't, that we as a council and as an organization are always committing to be a learning organization. We need to continue to learn what the barriers to employment are. What we're, from the macro standpoint and the micro standpoint of different things that are happening in different parts of town. So I think it would be very valuable if we can direct staff to show us what those folks in our community, what those barriers actually are. I think we know some of the big ones, right? Reentry, you know, that's something that is near and dear to a lot of folks. You know, obviously during the pandemic, retooling, that was a big one, but I think we shouldn't assume. There are two barriers that I think are very important, and I invited some people today to come into this meeting. Something we talk about, but I don't think we really talk about enough from a city standpoint. Childcare. Childcare is integral to this. In full disclosure, I am one of the city's representative on the Smart Start board, and I invited Smart Start to attend this meeting, because I think this is an organization that if we're not familiar with it, we should become familiar. And I know that we're not familiar enough because I sit on the board and we have some conversations, and they're doing a lot of work with the county. We administer all the state funds to pre-K and a lot of early childhood development. But I can speak as a single father of 3 who works multiple jobs to make ends meet. Childcare, finding good, reliable, affordable childcare is often the difference between me taking a job and not. If my day of work is not worth it because of how much I have to pay for childcare, then I'm not going to work. And I work in a non-traditional industry that allows me to do that. Not everybody has that privilege. So, you know, this is integral to getting and keeping a job. And I think there's a role that the city can and should play with it, but our staff is just not talking to the work that is being done enough. I'd also say that part of why childcare and specifically early childhood education can be out of reach and so expensive is one of the things that it's a workforce that needs to be developed. The supply doesn't meet the demand that is out there and this is from across the economic spectrum, you know, for folks down in Ballantyne to off Beatties Ford Road. So I think there's a place. We don't deal with early childhood education and child care. We're not going to solve the economic development issues in many different parts of our community. Also, I would encourage us to find ways to include trade unions in our discussion and in this discussion. Trade unions are valuable and I think underutilized resources in our community. They're doing incredible work in developing our workforce and providing apprenticeship opportunities. And again, when we think about barriers, how do we form partnerships with those in the community, right, that are able to access folks that might have barriers from entering into workforce development programs within the city, right? These are organizations like the Carpenters, IBEW, Iron Workers, where again, we don't have enough supply of those workforces, but is there a way that we can partner and again, not start from scratch, but build off of what is working in our markets? And again, I think those 2 entities, Smart Start or early childhood education and trade unions need to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So let me see if I can summarize. One, Ms. Dodson, I think as relates to the city's participation and this committee's participation, rather, in the Jobs and Housing Summit, that all of our workforce-related tools should be on display for the public to understand what they are, how they can access them, and how we can promote them, right? Secondly, Councilmember Dre's a great point. How can apprenticeship programs and earning income and taking classes, how can we make sure that we kind of begin to identify a model as a result of this summit that we can kind of adopt or put together as a result of bringing all our stakeholders together. One that I didn't mention is hopefully as we begin to invite additional stakeholders to the table, that we don't forget about some of our major projects like the Innovation District and the Pearl. I met with Atrium last week. They are now beginning to identify large stakeholders that are kind of looking at Charlotte because of what's happening there. Within the next 2 to 3 months, they'll be looking at hiring opportunities. So this may be a good opportunity for us to introduce them to all our local players on the ground that's already doing the work, where they can kind of fit into what's already happening versus recreating the wheel. So that might be an opportunity for them. How do we identify the opportunities and the job seekers? How do we kind of match them together? Is it possible for us to do a pop-up trade job fair at the summit? I'm not sure. We got a lot of community stakeholders within that space already. We hadn't identified a date, but is that hypothetical? I don't think we're not going to do this until January, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, right? So it gives us 2 months to kind of work with some stakeholders to see maybe we can have a part of what we do, a pop-up job fair. Workforce development, in reference to the jobs of today and tomorrow, and so we make sure that not only are we, and that goes back to the Atrium deal, right? Opportunities for today, but what's going to happen March 2023, June 2023. Can we kind of do some forecasting to identify those potential employers and get them on the ground ready right now? Again, making sure that we have the right partners at the table, and we have a lot of stakeholders that we've been working with over the last year, making sure that they're there and present and that they're visible on stage, as well as in again, a pop-up world, if they have something to offer to the public. Construction-related jobs. Is it possible for us to get the General Contractors Association there and kind of talk about, again, with Braxton and Ed said about trade and these trade opportunities, plumbers and painters and electrical workers, right? Barriers to employment, reentry, retooling, child care, that we capture all that and making sure that as we kind of roll this thing out from our perspective, that those are a part of what we do. And something, and we talked about this before, I mean, and it's basically everybody in this room, how to look for a job. I mean, we kind of all get it, but there's so many people in our community who I approach and they approach me and say, "Man, I don't even know where to get started." And so I think we ought to dumb it down, for the lack of a better way, for me, to that person who's saying, "I just need some help, I need some direction, where do I go?" Right? And that's where our stakeholders, Charlotte Works and others, come into play. And then I think the Mayor Pro Tem is right in terms of out-of-the-box thinking in terms of trade unions and carpenters and iron workers, that they employ people as well. We ought not to dismiss their employment opportunities there and bringing people together. So I think that's a pretty good summary. Mr. Vice Chair.
I just wanted to add to what you just said. I had a meeting with Danielle Frazier to talk about Charlotte Works. I know you speak to them as well. Mm-hmm. And they have this career center. You think you heard from, there you go, right? So that struck me as being aligned with what you heard from some of us, that we need not to just have a portal, but we need to have a way to capture people who probably won't access a portal or will be afraid that they don't know what it means or how to proceed. So I would really like a situation where people can have a consultation and then we create a profile, right? Or we identify maybe suitable employment opportunities for them, or we identify needs, soft skills, and other needs that need to be addressed. It sounds to me like that aligns with what Charlotte Works is doing. So my main thing for a while, I think you know, has been, let's invest in this, right? I would much rather put somebody in a position where they can pay their own rent than put them on a life support system with a subsidy. Not to the exclusion, right? But I think that we can do more in this opportunity creation area in addition to what we are doing with the support.
Can I add just one idea?
Sure.
Basically hearing what you all are saying. If we look at the group of stakeholders that we convened to come up with the 6 recommendations from Hire, there was 25 different entities from the ecosystem, right? From Charlotte Works to Central Piedmont to Goodwill and the Urban League. I think one idea could have been, in going through the process with you all to talk about the portal and then hearing your inputs, could be to talk a little bit about how we came up with those recommendations, but then here you go a little bit deeper with those recommendations, right? With like, the portal can work in certain ways, but from your perspective, you want boots on the ground too. That could be something interesting for the summit, just throwing it out as an idea, is if we take the 6 recommendations, because Councilmember Graham, to your point, it does hit on things like, are we training for the jobs that are going to be here tomorrow? Are we thinking about the barriers that we need to eliminate so that people actually have that access to jobs? And maybe go a little bit more with our partners, not us talking to you, but more of you having access to the team that we developed some recommendations with, and then being able to get maybe a little bit further with the recommendations.
I think that's great commentary. I think we're on the right track. What I hope that we would accomplish, and I know there'll be a lot of talking heads, right? Them talking to us, council members talking to them, but also we use this as an opportunity where we can get the community involved and people actually looking for a job, right? And I think we got a lot of stakeholders, and Anna, thank you for being here, representing Charlotte Works, and others who will, I think, work with us to kind of create that type of environment if we can. Don't want to make this thing too complicated, so pull me back if you need to. But I think if we can go there and practice what we are preaching, right, which is the council is looking to educate ourselves and the community about how we push forward in terms of creating an opportunity for our citizens to get gainful employment, that we identify the resources out there for them to be attracted to make that happen. But if I'm Malcolm from District 2 and it's January and people kind of make that New Year's resolution, I want to get a new job this year, they can go to the Housing and Job Summit and there's someone there to talk to. I think that would be a beneficial experience.
So,
Hey, welcome.
Actually, I was listening online. I was in
Committee
transit.
Member Marjorie Molina.
Yes,
Since you missed the introductions.
Welcome. Introduce yourself and I'll give you the floor.
Okay, I am Marjorie Molina, council member representing District 5, which is East Charlotte,
And committee member.
and committee member. Actually, I heard all of the comments, and I think that they're all wonderful. You all know how I feel about Job Charlotte. I am like, just give it to me. Like, if I could do it myself, I would like just say, let's get people to work. I'm a single mother, and I think that is something that needs to be said. I have full primary custody of 2 children, and I have lived in Charlotte for the entirety of their lives. I'm highly educated. I am certified in project management, business analysis, data analytics. I have an associate, bachelor's, and master's degree. I've been a small business owner, and I struggled to get a job in Charlotte. And I think we need to talk about that. I think, and this is personal experience. I know that this is not something that says that everyone has the same experience, but I think it's important to make sure that the people we represent know that we have experienced some of the issues that they experience as well. And we have some of the same personal struggles. I don't have a job now. My part-time pay sustains us for the time being. So, and that says a lot. And I have a situation that's different than probably most of our constituents. But like I said, it goes, it needs to be said that, you know, I've been that person also serving the community and seeing all of our growth and seeing all of our development and wondering, how do I get in on that? And I think the average person feels that way. I think the average person looks and says, wow, there's another apartment building. And they're like, well, how can I get on that? You know, they hear jobs numbers and they're like, well, dang, that's a lot of jobs, but I don't have one, or I don't have one that's, you know, enough to, you know, pay my rent and keep my bills on track, or like Mayor Pro Tem said, afford childcare. Childcare has been, I love my children. Being a mother is the greatest job of my life. I wanted to be a mother more than I wanted to do anything in the whole wide world. But it's a sacrifice. And, you know, when for any parent, male or female, it is an obstacle. And so the more resources we have, because, now we're awarding ourselves the trophy of saying that we attract millennials, but millennials are going to meet each other and they're going to get married and have kids, right? So where are they going to live, and what kind of childcare resources are they going to have at their disposal? And actually, that would be the generation after us, because I'm technically like the oldest of the millennial generation. So when you turn 40, I don't think you even say like a thing. Yeah, you just quit saying stuff. I know I do. I just don't belong. But as far as these, the younger generations that we're attracting, I think we need to make sure that we understand that yes, we have South End and all of these great things, but then what happens when they meet each other and they want to get married and they want to buy a home and they want to, stay here in our great city and they want to have babies like I did and like most of us did, and they want resources. What do we do for them, and how do we make sure that we're being responsible with those choices? And that's what we want them to do, right? We want you to go out to the great places. Hopefully you meet your person and, you do what many people decide to do with their adult life. But I'm rambling, but I'm rambling with a purpose. I'm saying that, I'm of the belief that education can work, but education alone cannot work. I come from a small town where people work with their hands. My paternal grandparents were sharecroppers, and they had 18 children, and they didn't have one child that didn't know how to work with their hands. And they raised children, and they bought houses, and they lived in my hometown, and they could get a factory job back then, and they could buy a house, and they could pay a car payment, and they could raise a family. And so since we don't have those options, we can rethink what that looks like. We can tool people where they don't have to spend 4 years in an educational system. Maybe they can spend 6 weeks or 2 months or however long, and we can, Vice Chair Mr. Drake said, we could pay them while they learn. I love that. That's why I'm so attracted to Job Charlotte, because I think a lot of what we're talking about starts there. And then we, like most of my colleagues have said, even our chairperson, combine with the different resources, decide who we need to have at the table to have these types of conversations so that we can really start to deliver solutions where with combined effort, because again, I am one of those people who I know that your effort is what's going to speak at the end of the day. With combined effort and the resources that we can try to galvanize, we can help you help yourself to change your life.
Thank you.
Bravo.
So,
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
One brief comment.
30 seconds.
Yes, 30 seconds. Let us go into this summit with the goal of coming away with decisions and with actions. There's a risk at a time like this that a whole lot of talk takes place and that we all feel good about what was said, and then later you ask yourself what actually happened then. So I hope we'll be able to look back on this summit and remember that certain things happened then. Thank you.
I think that was well worth more than 30 seconds, and I concur. I concur with that. I don't want to walk away feeling that we just did something, right? I really want to walk away that we really kind of educate, inform, and enlighten the community in terms of what we're trying to do. And Councilmember Marjorie, I entitled your comments, "What about me?" Right? And I think there's a lot of people in our community are like, I'm not as eloquent as she was, but seeing the growth of our community and feeling that they're being left behind and saying, what about me? Well, I want a job. I want to be a part of that. And they don't know how to kind of make that happen. So I think if we could end on Ed's comments, decisions and actions, I know we said a lot. But I think based on our earlier conversation, a lot of what we've talked about today, you guys are already on it, right? And so I just look forward to getting a date, and I think in the appropriate location. I think the last time was at Bojangles. I'm not sure why that was chosen, but I just think it needs to be somewhere that is convenient for folks who may be traveling to visit with us, going back to the transportation to get there. And and gives us enough room to do what we need to do. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, item number 2, which is something that we really need to get our arms around, and I think we have the right person to help us do that, which is our 30-minute presentation on the arts and cultural action plan that we've been working on. Priya is here as well as Tracy. Priya, Tracy, I'll give it to you, and then you'll introduce our speaker who will lead us through this discussion.
Yes, we have, I'll do the first couple of slides for you, and then Priya will spend about 5 minutes on the remaining slides, and then we have Joy on the phone and Richard as well. Okay. For questions, if there's questions that come up. If we can go to the next slide. So really today, we wanted to talk about the referral and then discuss in progress the findings and the benchmarking and the case studies. We can go to the next slide. This is what came to committee, which was review and affirm the Arts and Culture Ad Hoc Committee's recommendations. It's number 1, and I think Councilmember Graham, Councilmember Driggs, and Councilmember Winston have kind of taken that piece and are working through some of that. And then the second piece of it was explore how arts and culture policies can be used to drive economic development and job creation in Charlotte. If we can go to the next slide. So we started to ask some questions, like where do jobs and economic development with arts and culture, where do they intersect? What do their jobs look like? And we're just putting this out to start the discussion for you. By no means is this kind of the end all be all. How do other communities oversee and support arts and funding as it relates to job creation as well? And so again, just something quickly to kind of start you as you think about the discussion in this committee. And how to move that forward. Priya, I will hand it to you for the next slides to just give a little bit more of the background.
Thanks, Tracy. So as Tracy said, we are, taking the jobs and economic development lens to the arts and culture plan that's being developed. And as I know we've talked about in our previous committee meeting, as well as with council, this really comes from the mandate that was in the ad hoc committee's letter and recommendations from last year that Tracy referenced a moment ago. And as we talked about last month, we really pulled that into the request for proposals for this arts and culture plan, and that's really driving the scope. So as we looked at how jobs and economic development intersect with arts and culture, we thought, it really is important for us to look at the arts and culture ecosystem. What does it look like? Who are the players? So that then we can also look at, okay, what are the levers and the different drivers we should be looking at? So this is just a brief snapshot to kind of begin to think about that ecosystem. And you can see a lot of different pieces are represented here that we have all talked about before and that also come up in that ad hoc committee recommendation letter. So one thing that we'll briefly talk about it, and certainly Joy will discuss, is she will also refer to the pre-reading that we shared with you last week, which has a little bit more information than we have on the slides here, is that all of these different pieces of the ecosystem, they actually relate to each other and they touch each other. You can see here, if we think of a pipeline of how someone moves through, how they can have a career, how they could build a business, you see different pieces like, artists or creatives or nonprofits and for-profits, how they employ folks who are participating in both those parts of the system. How someone first learns their skills and trains, whether it's arts and culture training or other things that can be applied in arts and culture. They start as students, often in K through 12. Then they move into those higher ed opportunities potentially, or other apprenticeship opportunities as those may be, and then these activities take place in facilities, of course, different types of facilities. So those are just some examples of different ways that the pieces of this ecosystem fit together, and we're looking at how those, what policies relate to these different pieces of the ecosystem, how organizations and how other cities are governing those and delivering services, and also what are the funding sources. So that's some of what you saw in your pre-reading, a kind of a snapshot of how a subset of other cities that the consultant team has been researching, how they do this. And that's really just meant to be fodder for this committee's discussion and thought. And we're interested to see, what maybe struck you about that, what interests you, and what you'd like to know more about. And with that, I will just turn it over to Joy, just for the talk a little bit more about this, and then she can share the last couple of slides, which is more of what is coming in the arts and culture planning process. What more information are we getting from this phase of work? Joy, are you there?
Thank you so. Yes, I am. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Welcome, Joy.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us. And thank you so much for sticking with us and being so involved in not just the outcome of this arts and cultural plan, but really helping us to hone in on the big question that we are constantly looking for, that you charged us with from the ad hoc committee, of what supports a strong arts and culture economy, and what is going to support that in Charlotte. So as a part of that pre-read information that you see what supports the strong arts and culture economy in other communities. What we are now looking to do is understand that for the city of Charlotte, or for Charlotte. So that said, I just want to remind you of where we are in the process. When you're looking at this schedule, you see these cultural plan milestones. Of course, the pink circles are you all, City Council touch points, and we've had a number of those touch points over the last few months, most recently coming to you in October, when we updated you on how the community engagement was going, and how we were really blanketing the Charlotte area with conversations, intercepts, surveys, interviews, all kinds of different ways to engage with the Charlotte community. And today, of course, just a brief update to engage with you about this, the information you receive about how other communities are investing in arts and culture, and really delve more deeply into what you are looking to see further. Next slide I want to go to, because it's going to describe the next thing that you will see from us is the State of Culture report, which will come to you in mid-December. And this is a report where you're going to hear from your community. So broadly, all of the different findings that we got through this engagement of, at this point, thousands of Charlotteans, and really to understand what that is telling us. So that summary of findings from public engagement. Our economic development team from Fourth Economy has been working diligently on the cultural asset map and findings. So that will also come in that this report. So just to orient you to what you're looking at, on the left side, you have the chapter titles, and on the right, you have a bit more of a description of what you'll get in the report. Moving back to the left side, we're also going to be sharing information from those other cities, that in-depth information about the different communities that are analogous in some way, shape, or form, benchmarking information on how those communities are investing in arts and culture, and how and what are the results. And then, of course, the evaluation of the local funding landscape, and what we, through all of this work, and having done this cultural planning work for over 20 years, what we see is emerging opportunities. This is where we're starting to identify the priorities that you as a composite have for arts and culture across the city. What that means, I was just riveted by this conversation about jobs that you just had before us. And absolutely, what does that mean for the pipeline, the jobs pipeline, as Priya was talking about just a moment ago. What are some emerging opportunities that we see just that Charlotte is ripe for? And then, of course, the ways that we can get feedback from the public and from the public, and then where we will go with the next steps. So that report, that State of Culture report, will be coming to you, as I said, in mid-December, and we're looking forward to that conversation. Next slide. And then finally, the arts and culture planning continues to go forward. We are completing the community engagement phase. As you may have seen, we have extended the survey through November 14th. And I would like to say that is not because we have not had great response. We have had phenomenal responses to the survey. But we actually are now able to get into more patches of more parts of the community and recognize that we still want to get even more feedback from different groups of the community that we recognize we had not reached before. We are refining research on those comparables, funding, and governance models. And we will have a steering group meeting with that board and steering group on November 15th. That monthly advisory board meeting, and we'll continue these regular updates to council. So I will pause here and ask Priya or turn it back over to Priya and Tracy for the discussion. I'm here, and Rich Overmeyer as well, to answer any questions.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, Joy, for the presentation. Also want to acknowledge that Councilmember Wallington has joined us remotely, so she's online. Welcome to the meeting, and the floor is open for questions. Councilmember Drakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joy, this is great work. I really appreciate what you're bringing to us, and I think it is responsive to a lot of what I thought and I think we thought we needed. So I'm looking forward, for example, to seeing in greater detail what the comparisons with other cities look like. And in particular, the ones that are in this slide deck that we got as a pre-reading, what is the breakdown of their budgets, right? Let's go a level deeper and look at how they spend their money and see what lessons we can learn from that. I know that different members of council have expressed different opinions about what the emphasis might be. So I've said in previous meetings, I want to make sure that we are all on board early and that we don't have a situation where a plan comes back and then it turns out that somebody thinks we should have done this or we should have done that. That would be very late. You guys need time to do your work and to come back with something that has a strong presumption of being accepted by us and appreciated by us. One thing I'm interested to know, Priya, is there has been conversation about how the grant making works in the new world after the culture plan. What is your understanding about that? Do you think that the board that we have now would actually be responsible for deciding on grants, or do you think that they will finish their work on the culture plan and that might contemplate another process when it comes to grant making?
I think it's too early to know yet. I think it is a version of the latter of the two options you just articulated, which is that the cultural plan will indicate what would be the recommended kind of way forward or options to consider moving forward, and it'll be informed by this data, both quantitative and qualitative, that we are getting through this phase of work.
So I appreciate that, but I look forward to hearing about that because that's a pretty basic question, right? The one thing I think we know is it was our intention collectively and in the report from the ad hoc committee that council members were not going to be making grant-making decisions. So we wanted an outcome in which we had turned over to members of the arts community those in-depth decisions about where we could most productively invest our money. The other question I had was, I talked recently with Krista Terrell of the Arts and Science Council, of which I think I'm still a board member, although in light of a lot of our discussions lately, I haven't been an active participant in board meetings. But I assume that they are sort of on your screen as you think about what to do, or are you considering where the Arts and Science Council might fit without any prejudgment as to what that might be? But that's a question we're asking, right?
Certainly, yes. I mean, I would say at this stage of the process, as with any arts and culture plan at this stage of the process, you know, everything is on the table, you know, and certainly I think, as you may be aware, you know, Krista is on the steering group.
Yes.
So, you know, we have a steering group of 40 or so members. So, you know, that the Arts and Science Council is, you know, we're very aware of the Arts and Science Council's historic role in grant making, as well as the work they do now. Of course, the Infusion Fund is a major funder of the Arts and Science Council, you know, at this time in terms of the support that it provides. So, you know, the ASC, as well as the bigger picture of the ecosystem that you just saw, is all part of the big picture that we are looking at.
Right, I understand that. I just think there is a constituency in the community that will be interested to know where we come out. So we want to be sure to answer that question, to be thoughtful about that question. Mr. Chair, I think that's it for now. I have one more. I'll have to remember what it was, so I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Councilmember Driggs. Councilmember Wallington, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you. I got a couple of questions, and I'll start with my question from yesterday. I know that we got the pre-reads, and I posed a question to the council at large, and I'd like to hear from the committee members in regards to that. And I know that Priya and others mentioned at the beginning of this PowerPoint presentation that this is meant to be kind of a wetting of the palate, if you will, and it's a broader discussion. But I'd like to understand a little bit more about what is, for me, the most intriguing part of the potential plan is how do we invest in a real supply chain that could drive economic development and that could drive jobs in arts and culture. I'm less interested, to be frank, with the specifics of how we assign grants. That's something that feels like a go-do. We have to go figure out. But to me, the real opportunity here is really understanding how we can drive a real economic development engine. So I'd like to, first of all, hear from the other committee members as to what your priority is coming out of this arts plan, because as I look at the components that will be there, I'm wondering if in this emerging opportunities section is where this will be expanded upon. But I just want to understand if the broader committee is also looking for that, so that I can make sure I'm in line with what the goal is and I can manage my expectations. So that's my first question. And then my second question is, as a follow-up, and it'll be for Tracy, I'd like to understand when we are looking to enter a particular market, whether it's advanced manufacturing, whether it's fintech, how are we approaching choosing which businesses that we recruit, or how we invest or incentivize certain businesses to be drivers in these value streams? So those are my two questions. I'd like to just kind of get a feel from my colleagues of what role or what emphasis they feel like should be really highlighted in this report.
Councilmember Driggs, and then we'll pivot to Mayor Pro Tem Winston.
So, Ms. Watlington, we talked about having, actually the three of us, the Mayor Pro Tem and Mr. Graham and myself, look at some information and start a process of outreach to council members. And we got back information from Joy about their process. I don't think we felt we were ready yet, pending some of the information that we're being told about now that we will get in a few weeks' time, to start the conversations with council members, and there are some pretty specific questions that we need to be sure we address. You know, the big box funding issue, live music venues, housing, I know is a concern of yours. So we need to clarify those things, but I think we will be in a much better position to do that and still have time to do that after we get the next round of information that you've told us about. So that would be my answer. I hope that's responsive to your question.
Mayor Pro Tem Winston.
Thank you. And Ms. Watlington, you kind of really teed up kind of my personal reflection as it relates to arts and culture from an economic development and jobs perspective. Yeah, I think there's an approach from all of our kind of policy areas, whether it be planning and housing and intergovernmental things, but specifically from jobs and economic development. I think, again, this council works best when we don't get too much into the weeds of specific programs, which is why I agreed, you know, when we were having the discussions around the ad hoc committee, we shouldn't really be engaged, like you said, with the grant making, honestly, because it's too small, right? Mm-hmm. We really, from an economic development perspective, we work best when we empower our economic development team to identify and go out there and target industries. So I would like to see in this cultural arts plan for us to guide our economic development team and kind of tee us up to give guidance of industries that we should target. You know, some of the examples that I've been saying, film and television, right? We've obviously I work in that industry, but last year was a record year in the state for spending, with over $400 million in the state. About $75 million of that was spent here in Charlotte. That's without a workforce. That's without the kind of industry-specific infrastructure. That's without us cultivating those ancillary industries that support that industry, whether it be grip houses, machine rentals, studios, sound stages. Are there other industries? I think about, for instance, you know, the fine arts market. This is me just pulling industries out, right? We have a lot of wealth in this town with big houses that are filled with art, right? Is that art being bought and sold here in Charlotte, right? Or are folks going out to Miami or New York, or LA or Paris and buying that? Is that an industry that we can bring here? Because that would drive revenue, right? You sell a piece of art for $1 million in Mecklenburg County. That's going to create revenue that can be reinvested. Are there other arts and culture industries? I think about even things like, I don't know, culinary arts, right? We have a premier university here that works in the culinary arts business field. Is this an industry that we could target and grow, right? I think of other things that other cities have done around culture. You think about Boston, the greater Boston area, they do thrive off of grants, you know, in terms of education and other types of culture. People will come here, and this is a destination to become a writer or a researcher. Are there ways, again, that we can look at different types of industries that fall under the arts and culture umbrella, so that we can give to Ms. Dotson to say, hey, we need to look at how we are creating economic incentives, how we're sending your staff out there to build these industries. I don't think we really look at industry building from that perspective, but I think if we have that kind of footing, that will create revenue, and that will create a different paradigm for creatives to live and thrive and exist, again, specifically from an economic development kind of perspective.
I guess my comment is similar to Councilmember Winston in terms of how do we use this Priya and Tracy in response to Councilmember Wallington's question to put heads in beds, right? Live performance that goes outside of the uptown community, whether it's in Ballantyne or Nodar or University City or in Beatty-Ford Road. How do we utilize our relationship with the Blumenthal to get more of these first run performances to come to Charlotte and these theater houses, right? way outside of my jurisdiction, right? But in terms of understanding the importance of filling our venues on a more consistent basis. One of the things that we benefit from the arena is that a lot of folks just talk about the basketball games there, but there's so much more that's happening in the arena that pit heads and beds other than basketball, right? And so how do we utilize, how do we pivot from historically what we have done, which is some of what I call the blue bloods, right? The Mint and the Discovery Place and others all are part of what we need to do to move forward, but how do we kind of change the channel a little bit, and how do we utilize our arts from an economic development perspective to put heads in beds and to stimulate some of the activity that we see hypothetically in South End, right? How do we get those folks more engaged in our arts community? And I think it's through live performances, and almost like the model in Austin, where I just thoroughly enjoy just walking from venue to venue and seeing a saxophone player or a guitarist, and all those venues are filled. They're buying food and alcohol and there's beverage taxes and all those things that's kind of helping support the local economy, right? So how do we kind of shake up what we're doing a little bit, not forgetting our past, but kind of pivot to a different future for the arts? And, you know, if we can do film and TV and production stages and live entertainment and all those kind of things, in addition to what we historically have done, that kind of drive economic development for our community, I think that's a plus. But as we all know, the devil's in the detail, and I think one of the things that in talking to the city manager and others, they're looking for direction from us relatively soon in terms of where we're headed, either before they get too far and they are way down the road, or certainly on the back end once the report is done. And I concur with my co-chairman. I really do support the work that's been done thus far. I think you're doing exactly what you were charged to do. I went back and took a look at the Arts and Cultural Council Committee outline, and kind of doing what we said we wanted to do, but I just think it's now in the council's hand to clearly provide the direction. I see you ready to jump in.
And you said exactly what I was gonna add is, you know, with the report coming out next month, do you want to reaffirm kind of what council's desires are prior to that report, or establish it prior to that report, or respond once the report?
Let's do this. I know Councilman Winston wants to ask another question. Councilmember Wallington, so we've answered question number one. I still have question number two in docket. Councilmember.
Well, I think just in response to that, I think as Mr. Driggs said, myself, Mr. Driggs and Mr. Graham have some work to do to make sure that we're touching base with all of council to provide you with some clarity of where we're at.
And that's my fault that we're late, because I've been hopping around and my wife stole my phone and forbid me to do any council business for 3 weeks, which I broke continuously. All right, Councilmember Wallington, your second question, and I thought I had it written down somewhere, but I don't.
I've got it.
All right.
She asked it to me in terms of what are we doing with specific industry sectors to, how are we identifying, what are we doing to incentivize them, things like that. And Councilmember Wallington, what I'll say to you is we have kind of a bucket of target areas. A large part of that is based on where our employment growth has gone. So like obvious ones like finance or advanced manufacturing. Ones that aren't quite as obvious, but that are in our list, headquarters. Having all of the resources, this community has a lot of resources and a lot of talent around what is needed for headquarters. We are merging more and more every day into the tech sector. And now I think we're positioned well to start a serious conversation around the life sciences and healthcare with what Atrium is doing and some of the base that we have here in employment. So it goes with growth trends around jobs in our city as well as our region? And then what are our training capabilities? That's another piece that we look at. How we incentivize the companies is a little bit different based on how we do our incentives and the investment that they're making along with the numbers, and we have different thresholds for that as we think about our incentives. So we're happy to consider new ones and other ones as we talk about what does our community want. And I know Mayor Pro Tem and I have had a lot of conversations about the film industry and how do we grow that. We remember when there was more state incentives and there was a lot of investment that was coming into the state, and how and what can we do there. So we have different ways of going about this and always open to other sectors. We don't pick, and we don't say we have 5 sectors and it's only 5 sectors. You have to look at all the opportunities as they come. But when we lean on the Alliance to go out and do lead generation, they're generally looking at those primary sectors as they are looking for opportunities.
Okay. Councilmember Ashmere, I apologize. I think you've been waiting for quite some time now.
No problem, thank you. So I agree with what's been said. What I'm looking for, which Ms. Joy has addressed in her report, is really the funding, sustainability of the funding. I know that there was huge decline in the private sector fundraising, and I'd like to see how this report actually addresses the ongoing funding sustainability and what role the private sector will continue to play and what role the city would play. And additionally, I think this report will also help address, there is currently, I feel there's a process breakdown between what the charge was for the advisory board, what the council's expectations were, and staff's expectations. So I'm hoping this report will also bridge and ensure we are all on the same page, and having some sort of charge actually on the paper in writing that everyone agrees. I think that will help us go a long way. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Can I comment on that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Ashmere. Councilmember Drakes.
I think that's a very important comment that I wanted to also highlight. We are partners right now with private funders, and therefore I think we should clarify what our goals are, but then we should also coordinate with them, because I think we're within right now a 3-year commitment, and after that, who knows? So what we do now will probably influence our prospects for getting a continuation, like being able to continue. So there are some things that in the earliest conversations between the manager and the mayor and the Foundation for the Carolinas and some of the private funders, there were some things that concerned them, like for one, having secure funding for some of the venues. I think we have scope within the funding that we have right now, which is so much more than we had before, to cover a couple bases like that, or make sure that, expectations that were part of the original commitment are met. And then still a lot of latitude for council to say, okay, now here are the other things we can do. But the main thing is that we need to establish pretty soon, as I think I've heard here, some clarity about what those other things might be again, so we don't end up with a situation where the culture plan comes back and we are not united. There is no consensus among us about what it was that we were expecting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. One of the things I just want to just throw on the table as an aside is that we, let's not forget about our county partners as well. I think they can play a significant role moving forward. So hopefully we're updating them along the way in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it, and they're a part of that, folks that we're interviewing as well.
Mm-hmm. They are, yes, and I just want to confirm that Joy can speak to this if she has anything to add, but wanting to confirm that the consultant team has been doing lots and lots of stakeholder interviews, and those include the private sector partners and the Foundation for the Carolinas, as well as the county commissioners, the county manager. So yes, we are definitely, they are hearing from all of those stakeholders as part of this.
All right, so mindful of the time, I'm looking around the table, Wallington, as mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, I think we're good. Priya, close us down. Where are we headed to?
You're headed to the State of Culture report, and I just to your point, Councilmember Driggs, I was just going to underscore that those things that Joy outlined that will be coming in this report that is the synthesis of this research. The goal is really to get you all data so that you have, you can do that data-driven decision-making that is referenced in the ad hoc committee letter, and that this is ultimately going to result in the plan as well.
Okay. Joy, thank you once again. I think there's another colleague of yours who's quietly silent as well.
Rich Overmeyer and Overmorier, sorry, and he is the head of the president of Fourth Economy, and they have been doing a lot of this economic development work, which you see in your pre-read. We are using this information hand in glove with what you all are doing there, just to make sure we are able to provide you with the information you need to make decisions, to ask questions, to get into a space where, as Councilmember Driggs said, you're not at the end of the plan saying, well, I wanted these things. We are kind of in concert working together to ensure that we're providing the information that you need to make decisions.
Well, thank you, Rich. Thank you, Joy, for being with us once again. Thank you, Priya, for the presentation. This segment of the committee agenda is done, and we'll pivot to number 3, which is international business strategy. I'm going to turn the meeting over to the vice chairman so I can stretch my leg. How about that?
To me, the international business strategy.
Yeah.
We have exactly 15 minutes left. I'm trying to remember the referral. I wasn't expecting that. One moment, please.
Just hand it over to Tracy.
I guess we'll just kick it over to Tracy, and I will not offer a preamble.
Thank you, Councilmember Triggs. I asked Alexis Gordon to come because she's doing a majority of this work, but if the referral, and we can go to the next slide, and then Alexis, I'll hand it over to you, was to review the current work programs and policies related to international business, and then work with the International Cabinet and other international organizations to identify a scope of services and funding source to study the strategy and develop a strategy for Charlotte's global business interest. And from that, then propose any new plans or policies in promoting international business. And so I wanted, before we really got into the meat of that, I wanted Alexis to give a little bit more of state of where we are, what we've been up to.
Yep. So that's what I'm going to do, is give you guys just a very high level of what we've been through so far. So as some of you may remember from the last meeting, we've had a few stakeholder meetings. We've also met one-on-one with different companies, just talking to them, in addition to me speaking with my peers across the world. Because again, if we're going to make an international plan, it should be competitive with not just our peers in the US, but our peers elsewhere as well. So that has all been part of our assessing of our current programs. We have found that there's definitely room to grow from what we do internationally as a city, and that there is a lot of information out there, some natural connections to some of the programming that we have that can also be done between departments. So this isn't something that merely will touch economic development, though a lot of it is going to be couched within economic development and our goals. We also assessed looking at our other peers across the globe, particularly from Mexico, Canada, and then Europe, a couple of different European nations that most offices have a lot more than a team of one, so there's definitely some room for capacity needs and growth at Charlotte to focus on international affairs. And for the next slide, when it comes to developing a plan, one thing that I have found is that there are a lot of best practices to learn from that already exist out of 30 different cities that have either an Office of International Relations or a Director of International Affairs or something similar to my role here at Charlotte. The majority of them, I would say, don't have a plan, but all of them are working on them. There were about a dozen plans that do exist in the 30 people that I tend to work with. Some of them have plans, but they're very outdated. So something to look at our current programs is the cabinet brought this to your attention as well. We have an international plan, but it was written in 1993. So good time to be updating our plan. Something else that we have found is that most of the experts are found within academia or through network and think tank support. So a lot less of it is done through more like consulting firms are not focusing on this. It's been very government driven. A lot of it is also a lot of new growth that's happening within the federal levels of our government. So the State Department has added a subnational diplomacy vein in their work that is starting here. Also, the federal government of Germany has done the same, and they're issuing funding a little bit further in progress than our country. The Germans are when it comes to that. And so we can go to the next slide. So I have 3 short-term staff recommendations. One is to align our scope with our international peers. So the cabinet had asked you guys for us to look at it from international business. And while I think that economic partnerships will be a heavy focus of our strategy, I do suggest having a fuller international relations strategy so that we are in line with our peers globally. Most people look at more than economic development, but I would say the majority of the plans that I have read are economic development heavy. Jobs, migration, these are all issues that they often look at. Sustainability, not just in climate, but how we're developing things in a way that look more like what we call economic mobility in Charlotte. But that's the terms that they tend to use. The other thing is to create a fellowship to coordinate research, as there is a lot of research that needs to be done. And a fellowship, I've spoken to a lot of different of the think tanks and some of the academics that focus on this area of research. A student is going to have more access to their research than, say, a regular consultant will. And so I think it would be great for us to create a fellowship to look at that. The other thing I would like to do is just a few weeks ago, along with Sarah Hazel and Holly Eskridge, I was in Washington, D.C. for an urban diplomacy exchange with our sister city, Krefeld. The mayor of Krefeld and several of his staff members were there. Our counterparts, it was our direct counterparts of an exchange. So we are part of this. It's being funded by the federal government in Germany through a nonprofit in Germany. And so I want to really look at how we can use this innovation and sustainability exchange with practical experience to influence exchanges that we have in the future. So really to kind of see again that pilot, how does this work? How does it function for Charlotte? So those are my top 3 short-term recommendations. And the next steps that I want to help with my work and to help me focus is, what are you guys feeling about this so far, from the presentations that we gave in the spring with the cabinet to these current updates? Where is the committee feeling? What are some of the items and issues internationally that council's interested in? I know in our community we've heard everything from FDI and trade to the SDGs and sustainable development as it is not just in relations to climate, but also to goals and mobility. So those are some of the things I have heard, but it would be great to hear, what are you hearing? What are your goals? Many of you have seen a few delegations come through, and I want to thank you guys for that. As the pandemic loosens and we have a new normal, we are starting to pick up again with visitors from abroad. So it does offer a lot of opportunities to learn from other governments and visitors as well.
Councilmember Driggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We all need to appreciate Alexis. She has been working in this space tirelessly for a long time. Effectively, you're a credit to the city. I just want to let you know.
Thank you.
And you and I have met Germans and French people and Chinese and every conceivable nationality, including that whole group we talked to recently. And Mr. Chair, as a matter of personal privilege, I want to tell you a very small story about how I went to an event for Chinese business people and didn't know that I was supposed to speak. I came and I took my seat, and the lady said, "You're up next." So I looked around to see who the hosts were, and I cooked up a kind of, "We're so grateful for," and so on. And there was an interpreter standing next to me, and she was translating everything I said to Chinese. So at one point I sort of paused, And I said, I'd like everybody to know I have no idea what she is saying to you. And she may or may not be translating what I'm saying, so I'm not necessarily responsible for what she's saying. And they all broke out laughing, and I knew that she was translating what I was saying. So my question, I have heard particularly from the German honorary consuls I've known, 3 generations of them, that Charlotte could do more to make German companies, for example, aware of us, so that the German business community here likes being here, and we have some wonderful companies who are present here. But the question is, what can we do? Do we go to trade fairs? Or do we work with consultants? How do we somehow get the Charlotte message up on the screens of companies? Is there something that we've left out?
So I think that there is a huge opportunity for us to be present. There is a wide menu of a la carte ways to engage abroad. Some of it is through our partners. So working in the past, we relied heavily on the Alliance. Sven, many of you remember him when he was there, would take our message of coming to Charlotte. There were many times we'd also meet with them there. Our honorary consuls, our German honorary consuls in particular, have always been very active when we have any economic development group, whether it's with EDPNC or the Alliance, or even when Mayor Lyles and the city manager and several others, including Tracy, were in Paris right before their FinTech Expo. Being engaged, and especially with that consular corps, we were able to set up meetings with our consulate to kind of hear about where do we need to do more outreach in France in particular, but Europe in general as well. And so there are always those wonderful opportunities to bring those partners together, whether it be a trade mission or attending something like Select USA. We've had a couple discussions with our business attraction team about groups like Select USA and how do we do better at helping bring those delegations that are in DC for the add-on delegations that can come to Charlotte. Because one thing we have heard time and again from our German community, from our French community, from the Brazilian companies that I've worked with the Chinese companies I've worked with, is that once we get people here, they very much want to bring their companies here. And that is something that our business attraction team is also seeing. Recently, we just had a German company here, and we've had wonderful feedback from them so far that we are hearing through German companies that they met. They're telling them and they're telling us. So, Councilmember Driggs, I do want to say that that network of those companies that are here, those existing companies, is super important when it comes to business attraction. We rely heavily on the foreign direct investment that is already here to help us, because as they do business with their clients, their vendors, and even their customers, they start to hear about, oh, well, you're located in Charlotte. Why? And we want to help make sure we give them those tools and that they can connect with our team.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question, and I know we're running short on time. You're a staff of 1?
Staff of 1.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We used to be 2. But when we split immigration and international business, we decided to split those 2 teams. And so thus our team has remained 1.
And I know we talked about this a couple months ago in terms of the relationship between your office and the Alliance. They used to do a lot of international recruitment, and I think they disbanded or...
So they're changing direction. They are currently working on creating
So
their...
politically correct. I love it.
Yes, I do have a degree in diplomacy. But they are redoing their strategy right now. And it should be, I know the original aim was the end of the year, but I haven't followed up to find out if they're still on track for that, for what their strategy will be. They've looked at several things. One was hiring a consultant. They've changed their mind on that. And that's not unusual. More and more cities I'm seeing are changing their mind of hiring a consultant for this and saying, how can we show up for ourselves?
And that's what I was getting to. How do we show up as the 15th largest city in the country to begin to understand that our country borders is not where we should be limited to. It should be worldwide. And even talking with the folks at Atrium, again, I had a great conversation with them about an hour and a half, is in the Innovation District, all of these companies are overseas companies.
Yep.
right? And so how do we change our strategy to be really, really proactive, to get you more help, right? And to be a part of this whole international trade fair, for the lack of a better word, in terms of showcasing Charlotte. 'Cause I think you're absolutely right. Once people come and see who we are and how we do business and how clean our city is, et cetera, there's a magnet. And I think if we kind of get away from fishing from the shore to kind of go out where the big fish are, deep sea fishing, I think we can really, really, as we prepare our city's future for the next 5-10 years, that we really can be on an international map in terms of getting a lot more companies to come to our community and our region, which will benefit Charlotte as well. So we got 2 minutes, and I want to go to Councilmember Winston, and then I want to go to my ladies who are virtually to see if they have any questions.
I have my hand raised, Mr. Graham.
I'm sorry. Do you mind? Councilmember Ashmere.
Thank you. So a couple of comments. I agree with Mr. Drake's. Lexis has been a tremendous asset to our city. I've seen her attend many, many international events where we have industry representatives from different countries. I certainly appreciate her dedication to ensuring we have representation. I just want to ensure that as we continue to go through the stakeholder input, we are engaging organizations that bring in many international speakers and organizations to their events, like Sister Cities World Affairs Council, Asian American Chamber, Carolinas Chinese Chamber of Commerce, who have hosted many trade officials and other ambassadors to ensure that we have representation. I know Lexis is just one person, but I don't know if we do need to explore, to Mr. Graham's point, having some sort of additional staff to ensure that we have some sort of presence at these key events. Because I hear from, as I have attended World Affairs Council events with Mr. Phipps, usually we don't have any representation there. I know Mayor Pro Tem used to attend some of their commitments and events, so did Mr. Phipps. But I think we do need to ensure that we have a staff there. So when there is a key representation required, council member, at least a couple of council members are there, or the mayor is there. And I know that our international cabinet and other are also key members in this effort, because I know they're pushed for this. I would like to hear their feedback along the way as we move forward on this important plan. Thank you.
Councilmember Winston, does staff want to chime in? No? Councilmember Winston?
No, thank you. 2 quick things. As we think about equity lens on things, and really just thinking back to that meeting in the spring, I believe it was the spring at this point in time, when the community came and spoke to us. Let's take advantage of our community that's here right now, right? 1 in 5 people in Charlotte are foreign born. We have small little economies that they're trying to sustain, right? From the international community. So how do we go to the folks that are already here to understand what is needed, right? And how do we in turn take advantage of our airport and our relationship with American Airlines, right? We should be looking at cities that have busy airports like us. And I know a lot of us is domestic business travel, and we're increasing our international presence. But in a different time, I worked dealing with logistics, moving a lot of big, heavy stuff far ways. And I learned that we might think it moves a lot by trucks and trains, but a lot of that cargo space, right, is what drives aviation business. So thinking about this need for international business, these local economies, growing them, maybe we utilize the folks that we have here and the economies that are being built here to figure out which touch points that we should be prioritizing across the seas, right? Because yes, we deal with our sister cities and the places that we're familiar, but where are the touch points that communities from certain communities from East Charlotte can better inform us about specific products, right? So that those logistics companies over there are looking to move their goods here to Charlotte, and therefore to our community, but also through the rest of the world. So as we're looking at cities that have international strategies, I hope that we're comparing ourselves to cities that have similar airports, similar airport situations, especially as we're becoming more and more a logistics hub nationally and internationally.
So I'll add that so that is one of the things we want to make sure we're doing, not just the airport, not just the sizes, not just the makeup. We have a highly diverse, when I am at conferences and I speak a little bit about Charlotte, everyone is so surprised that we have about roughly 17% of our population is foreign-born. And the fact that it's highly diverse. When we're with American peers, they'll also have diversity and foreign-born population, but when we start cutting it down to saying, well, our number 1 is from Mexico, number 2 is India, everyone looks at me. And they're like, oh, your top 3 and 5 aren't Latin America. I said, no, if we do top 5, Vietnam's in there. And so that it's not just the fact that we have so much diversity, but there's diversity within that diversity. And that's really important to look at, but also industries. So within economic development, we have certain industries that we're looking at. As mentioned earlier today, headquarters is a very important part of that. So looking at peers that have a lot of headquarters, that have a lot of the same NGOs and institutions that we have, those are all the things that we will take into account when we're looking at our peers.
I'd also like to quickly point out, if we can find connections on the continent of Africa as well, that is overall place that we need to focus on. Thanks.
I will
Chair,
give you the last question.
Okay, and just, thank you, Mr. Chair. Whoop whoop, East Charlotte. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, because I can't say enough how much East Charlotte can benefit from us looking into what exercises, what opportunities are there for us to partner with the various communities. And look, East Charlotte, we are diverse. Even you could be an American and be diverse, right? Like, and I mean, I know we're talking about from an international presence, but you know, we don't talk about blackness. It's northern, southern. I mean, if I hear someone and they have a northern accent, I know that they've eaten different food from me. I know that they've, you know, grew up different from me. I know that the rhythm of their life may be different than my own. So I think I used to have a radio show called The Diversity Experience many, many years ago. And the one thing that I used to do with that project, and for the sake of time, I'm going to shorten it, I would look for our bridges, the things where we're more alike than we are different. And we have more likenesses from American-born to foreign-born than we even realize. I speak Spanish fluently as a second language, and I've done many, many things within several areas of our diverse communities, especially representing East Charlotte. But further than that, just my personal projects. And so I do feel like that we can gain enormous benefit from taking advantage of, you know, what our peers are doing internationally and bringing some of that information, you know, locally. You know, because I even think some of the stakeholders that we have in the community who are more adept at what's going on in their, you know, country of origin, if they had some of that stuff a little bit closer, it would create more opportunities. So, I mean, there's so much to talk about for sake of time. I just, you know, I'm here. I've seen you in more events than a little bit over the years, so I do know that you're a very valuable asset, and I'd love to hear more about, you know, what you see as far as the evolution of what can be and what types of partnerships that we can build responsibly.
Definitely. And I know we're short on time, so I'll just say that thank you. And that there is a lot that we see that's happening, and especially what I love when you said share locally what peers are doing globally, because one of the things that was so apparent in Washington 2 weeks ago was we had in between work sessions, we would have panelists. Almost every one of those panelists pointed out how cities are where things happen, and that we as cities have more in common than we have in differences, and how all of us are working on transnational issues, and how those issues affect our population, whether it be something as large as climate or something as much as finding jobs and paving roads, and that we can learn a lot from our peers for that. So thank you, and that will definitely take a play in this. Thanks.
Well, I see the next steps in front of us in terms of takeaways, which is to continue the stakeholders' input and to create a scope of fellowship. And so we'll work with our director to see when this comes back to us, I would imagine, for more conversation. This is the first, not the last. And just want to thank everyone for their participation. I know we ran a little bit over, but I thought all the discussion was well put together, and I adjourned the meeting. Thank you.